Callum, last time we spoke, I showed up on your podcast and we talked a little bit about election interference. And since then, you've done a lot of work and travel to a couple places, including Davos and the World Economic Forum. But more recently, I actually just caught it on Twitter, or on X, I should say, where you posted a full-length documentary on the immigration crisis going on in Ireland. So when I saw that, I said, I got to call him, bring him on, and I got to learn some more because it was definitely pretty gripping. At the beginning of that documentary, what you said, and I urge everyone to watch it, I'm going to link it right below this. You said that Ireland holds the key to solving the immigration crisis. So you're from the UK. Obviously, I love the background you've got there. So Ireland's in your backyard. Tell us a little about what they've got going on, and tell us a little bit about why you think that they could be the key to solving a crisis like this.
Yeah, there's a few reasons. So geographically, it can't get any further through Europe. You then got the Atlantic Ocean, and then but you are thousands of miles away. So I think geographically, it almost like Ireland is almost at the last stop. It's ravaged all the way through Europe, and now it's got to come back. So in a political sense, Ireland is one of the only places where I actually think, and speaking to a lot of people there, that it's hard to rig elections there. It's not, they've got strict mail-in ballots, as you call it in America. It's very much you have to go to the place and vote. So at the moment, it's actually quite hard to rig elections. So I think it's one of the only places still where you can, to a degree, vote your way out of a problem if that is the wish of the masses. So I think the way they're moving politically, it could be a place where it almost inspires the rest of Europe. And maybe not even just Europe, but the likes of America with your southern border issue. And you're also importing people from the Middle East. People are flying over there. So I think Ireland holds the key in that when they win, that win will ripple effect through Europe and hopefully we'll get back to an equilibrium and some sense of normality, if we can remember what normal means.
Right. Well, we definitely have the crisis going on over here. I think I agree with you that Ireland is an interesting microcosm, a smaller subsect, right? A much smaller population. In fact, you mentioned they have 5 million people. That's only, I think, one third of just New York City alone, right? So the problem that we're dealing with here is a much larger scale. But one thing I'm curious, when I look at Ireland, you can't really walk across the border, right? So how are these immigrants, and actually what I also would like you to touch on is how are these illegal immigrants getting into the country, and what really classifies them as illegal, right? If presumably they're taking a plane or some sort of commercial travel, they were allowed in. So they're not running across a border. Am I getting that right?
Well, technically, they can walk across the border because Northern Ireland is part of the United Kingdom. It's sometimes known as West Britain.
Interesting.
But so they can. So from the UK, so from mainland UK, you can head over to Northern Ireland, but with no restriction whatsoever because you're not moving between countries. The way it's seen politically and nationally is you're just moving from one part of the UK to another part of the UK. Similar as if I just drove to Cardiff. I could drive to Cardiff and no one would check my vehicle or what have you. So once they get there, you can then literally walk across the border because there is no hard border in Ireland. It is literally the road signs change, and it goes from miles per hour to kilometers per hour. That is the only that is the only way that you would know that you've gone from Northern Ireland to the Republic of Ireland. So in that sense, they can, and sometimes they do. They'll get into mainland UK. They'll get a ferry from Liverpool or Stranraer in Scotland and go to Belfast, and then literally get a bus or a taxi, or they could even walk to Dublin. And then once they get to Dublin, they then claim asylum. Or in some places, so I was told by a guy called Michael Leahy, a guy who's he's running to become an MEP in in the European Parliament for Ireland South, and I really hope he gets in. And I'm even going to try and help Derek Bly with his campaign to get him in as well. He was telling me that in an airport near him, in a place called Shannon, one of the main problems the maintenance staff have is that the migrants keep breaking toilets on the planes because they like cut up their. They'll get on a plane in like Germany to the Republic, and they'll destroy their passport and shove it in the toilet, and then they land and go, "I'm a refugee, and I've got no paperwork to prove I'm not." Have that, Ireland.
Wow. You know, that reminds me of what we're kind of dealing with in the States here, where there's this industry almost of coyotes that they know the way that it works. They know the loopholes. They understand, then tell the migrants what to say, presumably when they come off the border, that we're claiming asylum. You can't arrest us. You can't send us back, right? It's this UN treaty that goes back to the 80s. And I believe that's what that Ireland is dealing with too. But this industry is formed where, okay, even further, right. Well, I maybe it's been amended and all that, right? But the industry has been formed where it sounds like, right, you get on the plane in Germany, of course you have a passport, presumably you're going to get a visa and all of that when you land, but to show up without it, oh my goodness, yeah, that's like a strange loophole. And then I imagine the government is just kind of stuck, right? But it does sound like they're condoning it. And that was one thing I noticed as well that you'd said in your documentary, that these migrants are being housed in government facilities in many cases, like army bases, like the Irish Army is putting them up. Is that accurate?
Well, let me just quickly first go back to the point where you were on about loopholes. I don't even think they're loopholes anymore, because every man and his dog knows exactly how this works, which to me goes to show that those that who in positions of power that allow it, and the politicians that don't get rid of this, are collaborators, because they know full well what is going on, and they also know that we know what's going on, and that also we know that they know what's going on. So there's almost no kind of element of doubt anymore. So I truly believe those people involved, they are collaborators in the downfall of the West. Now back to your point about the accommodation. So yeah, there are some military bases, but it's also the same in the UK. So there are some military bases. So I was at Kilbride, and I said in the video, I gave the wrong address of the county. I said County Kilbride. It wasn't. It was Kilbride Regiment in County Wicklow, and it was annoying because some people there was a couple of people when County Kilbride isn't a place. I was like, oh, sake, yeah, I know that. I just read it, but I also read, when you like read two things at the same time and it amalgamates, and then I said it in my narration.
Yes. Well, I'll tell you what, we have a system of states here, and it becomes nearly impossible to understand. I can only imagine how you guys keep up with it over here. So you're over my head. I understand it as you're in the town and it's overrun.
Yeah, but it's like, so as I was saying, there's a Manston processing facility near Dover in England. That is a dual use facility. They are processing migrants there, as well as the army is still there, and it's the same in Ireland. Kilbride Regiment, they're housing migrants there, and there's still military personnel working there, and that is the thing that just I'm dumbfounded as to how anyone in the military thinks, hey, you know what's a good idea? Let's have a load of undocumented migrant fighting age men in our military facilities, because absolutely nothing can go wrong there.
Well, not only the military facilities, right? There were places that you guys went around in the countryside and identified old convents where presumably they've kicked out the nuns. And those happen to be located right around like a network of schools. In fact, all girls schools. And one of the reasons, and I think, right, that you should talk about is the reason you decided to make this documentary, that the level of crime, in fact, violent crime and sexual crime has taken off in this part of the world. And it's likely traceable to a big majority of these illegal immigrants. So I think that's what got you out there. But what have you found in terms of like rising crime rates, rising violent crime, and then also how is it being reported over there? Because presumably some of the people are aware of it, but some of them are not.
Well, yeah, exactly that. That is one of the main driving factors behind what I do. Like, I truly think rape is the worst thing you can do to someone. I even put it above murder, because at least with murder, that's it. It's done. There's nothing left. There's no
Yeah.
pain left to feel. Where if you rape someone, mentally, that person is dead. The person that was there before that is gone. However, they now live with that memory. So that's why I think rape is worse than murder. So that is one of the main things that drives me to do what I do, because I'm sick of seeing the most vulnerable people in society suffer at the hands of this. I'm just going to say it: invasion. I'm very biased in my reasons as to why I do journalism, but I'm very open about my biases, and I'm happy to be convinced otherwise or change my mind, as you kind of hear in America. So, yeah,
Right.
you mentioned there about the rise in crime. Yeah, crime does follow mass migration in the West, where you have an influx of single migrant men from countries where the cultures are massively different to what we have in the West, where they come from Islamic places where women are seen as commodities, as less than cattle, as second class, as you can do whatever the hell you want, and unfortunately they're allowed to get away with it. They commit these crimes, and they either get very lenient sentences or they get no sentences at all. There was a man in
Even
Ireland. He was basically let off because he couldn't speak English. He raped someone, and because he couldn't speak English, the courts are like, "Oh, poor fella." Fortunately, there was that big of an uproar that there was an appeal, and it was changed. But I think it was only to something like 10 years, which, as we all know, means 5.
Yeah, right. You get out early in most cases. That's shocking. I mean, how can you be a judge and sit up there and think that that's a fair and just thing to do? I think to some of these Middle Eastern countries, or maybe even the Northern African countries where it highly religious, and like you said, the women are not seen as humans; they're seen as objects in many of those cases. And I've also heard that homosexuality and that kind of thing, where, listen, there's a lot of opinions on transgender in our culture over in the West, but I also think that there's like this overarching theme, and I would say that 90% of Americans agree that people have their own independent liberties and their own agencies to go live how they want. Now, in some of those other countries where the culture is, we don't condone homosexuality, it's punishable by death. Well, it seems like that culture is also coming over, whether it's for women or gay men. And I think you also shared a story about that where, remind me of some of the details, but it got pretty gruesome, didn't it?
Yeah, there was a migrant who was basically using Grindr to hunt down gay men and kill them. And I think it was in the same mosque that he goes to, well, he was even going to after he killed people. So in Ireland, what you might have some followers that watch it and go, "What the hell are the Garda?" The Garda is the name of the police. That is what police is called in Ireland. The Garda, and it's meant to be something like guarding society. But yeah, they were trying to recruit people in that same mosque. But yeah, there was someone going, and I don't know if the driving factor for him was, "Oh, these dirty gays must die." Oh, someone's going to clip that, aren't they? That's not what I mean, but you know what I mean. But I don't know if that was why he wanted to do it.
Out of context. You're right.
Yeah. But the fact was, he was going after gay men and killing them. Oh, fuck's sake.
Yeah. They're good, man. I think it's funny. I mean, it's not funny, of course. It's terrible, right? But it's always hard to determine the motive of a crime, and especially if the person is ultimately let off, or the police or the Garda don't really necessarily file an accurate report. There's many cases in our country here where crime statistics are seen as inaccurate or unreliable, only because when you look through and it's as simple as scrolling through some mugshots and you'll see identified as white, identified as white, identified as white, and maybe some of them are not actually identified as white. And you wonder, what is the motive for that kind of thing even as well, right? It's almost like trickle down as a level of protection against specifically some of these migrants. Now, in the United States, the other thing that we find is, or at least I'd say accusations are levied, that the migrants specifically from Central and South America that are coming across our southern border, they are presumably Democratic voters one day in the future. So what we've established over here is that in some cases, there are accusations that these folks are able to vote illegally. I don't personally live in a state that would make sense, so I don't have too much data on that statistic, right? Elon Musk has been tweeting about it. But I'm curious, is there a similar kind of unwritten goal out of the government there that's currently in power to say, hey, we believe that these migrants from Georgia or from Sudan or wherever they're coming from, they're going to be valuable voting members of our society that will perpetuate these ideals that are maybe extremists or maybe too progressive, that the populist people don't really approve of them.
Now, I've not seen anything specifically about, giving them the right to vote, but they have been talking about giving them the right to work from day one. Now, a lot of people would go, well, why can't they work? The problem is if you give them the right to work, it's almost like being a teenager getting your first job. So these people are getting free accommodation, free healthcare, free education, free legal aid, money, getting an allowance even. So if you let them get all that for free and then give them the right to work, what it does is that, they'll work for cheaper because, well, one, they don't have to because they're already being subsidized by living at home like a teenager. So, your native
right.
Irishman and woman is then, there's no work for them because they've been massively undercut. But then, that in turn would be, well, if these people can work and they're contributing to our economy, they should be able to vote. So I think that is kind of, the natural order of things. But I've not seen anything specific about giving them the right to vote.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, you make a good point. Yeah, I remember now when I went back to living with my parents, I didn't have really any bills. So any money that I got at that time went to buying the new Xbox or the latest PS4. Well, at that time, it was like the PS2. But, right, it's an interesting point. And then you're able to, like you said, you could work for pennies on the dollar compared to somebody who has all of these obligations. It's a very simple way to look at that, and it boiled down interesting. And so in this country, when you work under the table or you collect cash payments, or even if you're undocumented in many cases, you're not paying those federal taxes at the very least. In some cases with cash, you're not even paying the state taxes. And those all go to fund these subsidy programs. So really, it sounds like the people of Ireland are really the ones that are funding this project here. They're paying to convert these areas. They're paying to pay for the healthcare and the childcare or whatever it may be for these migrants. So one of the things that I also thought was pretty interesting is how they are housed in New York. So it's the same kind of idea. And I'm in the greater New York area. So I have worked and lived in Times Square, or I'm in the elevator industry. So of course, tall buildings and hotels specifically. I've kept in touch with a lot of these building managers for the hotels. And one of the things that I've asked them, and never in a professional capacity, just kind of off the record, is to say, I've seen you on the news. I've seen your building on the news. You're housing migrants, hundreds of them. And how are you paying for this? Don't you collect a really expensive rate for tourism in New York City, like $300, $400 a night just for a hotel room? How are you able to give up your entire hotel to fill it with migrants? And one of the things that they explained to me, and it's well documented now from the media, is actually the city of New York specifically is paying above market rates to these hotels to fill them out. And they're buying 18-month contracts above market rate. So a lot of the hotels that through the pandemic in 2020 and 2021 were basically out of business, in many cases did go out of business, shutter their business, shutter their doors, or completely file bankruptcy. Now they find that they're racking in millions of dollars, no exaggeration, which, hey, it's a great thing for the business owners, but it seems to me like it might be a bit of cronyism, where the governments and the liberal progressive governments, specifically in the sanctuary cities, are now funding these corporations, these hotel conglomerates, Hilton or Hampton or whatever it may be, that have all their different brand names. So one thing I'm interested in is asking, the government is obviously paying them. They're living in military housing. They're living in converted convents. One of the things that you showed in your video was alarming to me. There seemed to be this encampment that they're building, and you just said that they're going to be building more of them. It looked to me like it was maybe hundreds, if not even over 1,000 small little units. And for people in the States, you might know, if you're moving, you get a pod container and you could sit it in your front yard. It's about the size of one of these units, Callum, just so you know, right? But it seems like just a 4-walled box with a roof and a door. And now they're putting thousands of migrants out in a field in these little encampments with permanent tents. To me, when I saw the image, and here it is on the screen for when everyone's watching this, this reminds me of a South American favela, where you look at the Brazil impoverished people, or those in those, like, you see them in the video games almost of Call of Duty, right? Where they have these corrugated sheet metal roofs and thatched beds. Like, is this what Ireland is coming to in 10 years? Is that land going to be totally dilapidated? It's going to be unlivable. So what was it like seeing those encampments in person and kind of, talking to some of the people that might manage it or work there? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I'd actually say maybe a better comparison as to what you saw was the COVID quarantine camps in the Sixth Reich of Australasia, the Ozreich, as I like to call it. Do you remember them, where they became very, very fascist-like? Right. They were literally putting people in these massive camps. I think it looks a lot more like that. That was the first thing that came to my mind anyway when I saw it. But yeah, well, you talk about the hotels as well. So in the UK, and this is like where my tinfoil hat comes on, my conspiracy hat. You look back to COVID. Did they want to destroy the hotel industry because then it would put these businesses on their knees and almost make them force their hand to turn against their man and their common man and woman in their own community by forcing them to take these contracts because they were bankrupt. In the UK, a lot of these hotels, either they were ones that were on their arse and about to go bust, or they'd already gone bust and were sold to foreign investors on the cheap, who then took up these very lucrative contracts. So it goes back to the whole globalist thing. This is happening in your country. It's happening in my country. It's happening in Ireland. The entire West, they're all falling in lockstep with each other, and we're having to foot the bill. In Ireland, there's I think it's £800 that each migrant can get for housing. But the interesting thing, €800. But the interesting thing is if a landlord, so let's say I'm a migrant and you're an Irishman, and we've both got €800 to spend on rent, they're going to pick me every time because the €800 I have, they don't get taxed on if they take me as a tenant. They do. So the annoying thing is for you is you're paying for my €800. However, my €800 that you paid for is going to my house, and you've got nothing. And that's one of the things they say in Ireland, that they can't help people in the emergency housing list because there's no accommodation. Yet they're building all these modular homes, and they're taking over convents and old historical buildings and hotels and even old office buildings and turning them into accommodation, which the Irish taxpayer pays for, to house people who aren't paying Irish taxes. And I've actually forgotten your question now because I kind of went on a bit of one there.
No, you answered it beautifully. What was it like seeing that? And it's alarming, obviously, but you're right. It's actually more indicative of perhaps these hotels were compelled in a way to their hands were forced. It was the best option at the time to accept these subsidies, and now to be able to collect these rents tax free. I mean, it's just a way for the government to launder money almost. It gives it to the migrant, and the migrant gives it right to the landlord, and the landlord is tax free. So they it's all in the same ecosystem. I mean, with hotels specifically, it's in the same ecosystem, or it's dictated by the amount of tourism. And I imagine with bad publicity, less hotel availability, who's traveling to Ireland right now? I know that it's lush and green and the weather's not so great, but you could certainly get a nice cold pint there. Have they seen that tourism is struggling due to the news about this immigration crisis, or is it more so business as usual over there?
I wouldn't even. I mean, yes, it is struggling. It is. It's really struggling. But I wouldn't even say it's struggling because of the news of it. The fact is, in some places there is no accommodation anymore because it's being used up. I tried to go to a town called Fermoy in the south near Cork, and there was like there was one place really close by that I could go to, but all the other places are now being taken up. So in some places, and obviously you have to bear in mind as well, we mentioned earlier, there's only 5 million people in Ireland. So, there's not going to be that many hotels because there's not enough people to kind of run them and staff them. So in small towns that do still
Of
rely
course.
on tourism, because when you think about it, okay, it's a small town, doesn't need that much of an income to fund it, but so they can get away with not that many hotels because they'll get used and get filled up. But in the likes of Kilkenny, again, it's a tourism town, and I'd recommend anyone goes and checks it out before it's gone. It's a lovely place. It's a lovely place that I think people should go and
Yeah.
visit. But unfortunately, as you saw in the video when I was talking to Luke O'Connor, people can't. They can't. You've either got to be a passing tourist or find an absolute gem. But when it comes to, running a local economy and paying into a local economy to keep it going, it's just really difficult for people to do now. And if you're coming from, I know a lot of you Americans go, "Oh yeah, I'm Irish, I'm Irish." Nah, you're American, but you might have Irish roots. A lot of them want to come back. It's going to be hard for them.
I have Yeah. I have to say, I really appreciated that little American accent. I'm not going to put you on the spot to do it again, and you will not be getting me to do any accents. I really do love it when I hear the American accent. It's one of my favorite things, truthfully. Um, so I really love it. It's one of my favorite things. So listen, we know that they're coming in, they're toppling the tourism industries, they're taking over all of these towns and creating a higher crime rate at the most simplest level. And right, even if the charts are not significant yet to say this is a true imminent danger, don't go here, you're going to get injured. I don't think it's at rises to that level yet, but it's absolutely indicative that there's a trend, and the trend is rising or moving in the direction that many longtime Irish citizens probably don't agree with. So what you said in your video was kind of grabbed my attention. You mentioned that the justice minister there, and I'm going to ask you to clarify what the justice minister's role is and what it might equate to in the United States or in the UK. But they mentioned that they feel that the anti-immigration protests or the anti-immigration group that is, that school of thought is being manipulated. So help me understand, who's this justice minister and why does she think that people just looking at simple statistics, why are they being manipulated or not?
I think I think her name's Helen McKinty. If that might be her name, I might have just kind of made the name, but I
That's
know who
okay.
you mean. But the woman
Well,
that's
for the
talking
viewers,
about.
it's on the screen right now. I'm typing it in.
Good. Did I get it right? Can I see? No. um, she talks about how
Yeah.
it's a far right thing. It's a far right thing to be to be concerned about, and this concern about crime it's the far right that are doing this. Well, firstly, I'd love to meet her in person and say what is a far right, because nearly everyone who says that doesn't even know what they're on about. It's just become this turn of phrase, this slur to just use that can't even be backed up. But that's it's similar. I go back to the globalist point. How it's the exact same in America as it is to Ireland, as it is to the UK, as it is to France, Germany, all these countries where we're being gaslit by the people we bloody voted in. Even if you didn't vote for them, these are public servants, and they're gaslighting their own their own community. Well, I say their own community, they're part of a 1%, aren't they? But they're
Yeah.
gaslighting their own citizens for genuine concerns, and that worries me, because where do you go from there? 'Cause that's one of the things that I don't think enough people kind of ask themselves and ask these people, because that's quite a claim to make when there is very well backed up claims, evidence, accusations about this sort of crime. Where do you go when people either deceive their own eyes or knowingly know that it's bollocks, but then accuse people with genuine concerns? What's the next step? I don't know the answer. I don't know
Right.
if you know the answer, but that is a thing we should all be asking. Shit, where do we go from here? Because the people that are meant to be putting in measures to protect the most vulnerable, to protect just every citizen of that land, they're now saying it's your fault. Where does this go?
Yeah.
Yeah, but
It reminds me of when Joe Biden came into the presidency here in the United States. One of his major campaign promises was that he'd be a president for the people, for all people. And ever since, he has basically delivered any remarks in public, which has been, maybe I can count them on one hand, without a prompter or without an aide there. What he's said almost every time is that these MAGA extremists are the threat, or the biggest threat that we're going to face, frankly. And it's very strange that, hey, how can you be a president for all people, but then you write off or subjugate, like, presumably half of the nation? But it's interesting, right? You use the term gaslight, like they're gaslighting you. That's how I feel as well. And then they label it as far right in an effort to dismiss it. But when you look at the nations and the governments, or lack thereof, of democracies in these countries that many are fleeing, I mean, you would probably be calling these authoritarian, fascist. You certainly wouldn't be calling these democratic nations. And that's what's so alarming, that, okay, we're trying to uplift these people perhaps by letting them in. We're subsidizing them. We're claiming we're giving them a better life. That's the virtuous moral of the story. But I also think that it's at the expense of others. And just on the simplest level, right? There are homeless people that are Irish. There are homeless Americans. And what we're focusing on is the homeless Middle Easterners, or the homeless Hispanics that are coming over the border. And we're prioritizing them over the alternative. So it's hard not to think another way. But here's what I wanted to ask you next. And I think it's a great transition, because we're seeing this same trend all over the globe. And you hearkened, I think, the word globalist, dare we say it. So another trip that you'd made recently, in addition to this Ireland trip, was you headed over to Davos to attend the World Economic Forum. And you've had a history at Rebel News where you'd been there before. So you are no newbie to running up to the likes of Larry Fink or Bill Gates right on the street and asking the questions that really everyone wants to know. Whether or not you get an answer is the better question, maybe. But when was it that you went to Davos, and what were some of your takeaways there concerning what you found?
Yes, that was back in January for the annual conference. Well, it's really interesting, actually, because they've got a bit of a slogan every year as to, like, or rather a theme for this year's event. Last year it was on about the climate change bollocks, but this year it was about rebuilding trust. And so I'd always go back to that whenever I'm trying to speak to these people. I'd go back to that, and I'd make sure they know that that's why I'm here. For example, I said to Tedros, the head of the WHO, I was like, why did you change the definition of herd immunity? And when he gave me like that dirty sex offender look, I said, people want to know. People want to know the answer. The theme here this year is rebuilding trust. Well, if you want to rebuild trust, you should probably start answering these questions. And like I said to the second gentleman, well,
Right.
after I said to him, "Why are you here? You're just the husband." One of his lackeys. One of his lackeys, like, what? I'll do it again for you. what are you doing over here? What are you doing? I was like, I want to ask a question.
I'm gonna start paying you to do that accent. It's pretty good, man. That's really good.
And then she's like, well, you get an opportunity to do that at the media conferences. I was like, no, that's the agreed media answering the pre-agreed questions. I'm
Yes.
here, for the everyday man and woman. I'm here to ask the questions we're all thinking, not the ones you agreed to beforehand. So why are you here?
Yeah.
What are you doing? Why is a man that no one's voted in having a say on the biggest stage of the biggest political stage of the world, having an impact as to what happens in my country, his country, other countries, and they never have an answer. And I think if we are to rebuild the political system, and we've spoken about this before, I have almost zero faith left in it. I won't be voting this year in the UK because I just think, what's the point? Westminster is run by.
We disagree with that one, sir.
And we do. And the thing is, I don't want to not feel this way. But the fact is, in the UK, like I said, I call it Westminster, not Westminster. It's Westminster because no matter who gets in, they're run by the WEF. But I think we have to, if we are to salvage a political system where you actually see people actively wanting to take part, we really have to have some serious accountability. I'm talking like criminalizing lies or having people immediately evoked from office if they go back on a manifesto pledge, because these people they implement things that no one ever agreed to, and yet they get away with it, and people die. That is the crux of it. People die with their decision. Their decisions cost lives, and yet they're never made to. I pray there's a God, because they'll have to answer at some point. But on this mortal coil, they never have to answer to this, which is why hopefully just they'll go to bed that night when I'm in Davos and go, oh, that fucking dickhead from the UK is that was annoying.
Right. No, I mean, you hit the nail on the head. Like, the one place that they aren't inviting you, the person that is wrong thinker, right? They're not inviting you into the presser that follows their conference or whatever they're hosting. It's like amazing, right? Rebuilding trust, but nobody's communicating. They're having meetings behind closed doors, presumably. When you think about like how to put on a production, how to put on a show, well, you bring all of these important people into one room, and a lot of them speak publicly. But you have to imagine, what are they doing behind those closed doors? What is Doug Emhoff really there to talk about? And what is he relaying back to his wife, who sits in the Oval Office, one of the most powerful people in this country? What we hear her say specifically all the time is that they want to address the root causes. And she's our immigration czar, apparently. She's the one that's in charge of correcting the border crisis. And I don't know what she's done. I don't think anybody really has any idea what she's done, because it doesn't exist. But her method is to repair what she calls the root causes. So presumably that means correcting poverty and crime and food shortages in South America. I mean, it's pretty insurmountable. It's probably got a 500 or 1,000 year history of all of these things. So is there any kind of stated goal for how to repair the problem over even in Europe, more so than just Ireland, right? Is there any kind of like, hey, we are going to take X, Y, and Z steps to thwart this? Or are they really just kind of bought into this kind of WEF thinking of globalism to say, they're screwed. That land sucks. Those governments aren't good. We're just going to bring them in here. Why would we even stop it, right? At least the United States government at this point, after 6-8 years, is acknowledging it, right? Well, I should say only after 4 years, because Trump definitely acknowledged it. But I think that a lot of our government did it. And I think now they're finally beginning to say it's becoming an issue. So are the governments over there in Europe saying the same thing, that this is an issue?
Yes, but I think they're literally only doing it, and I think it's a well used technique by the political establishment, basically just to calm the waters. I think ultimately, if a government pisses enough people off, it ends up like, a French Revolution. The guillotine comes out and some heads roll. I think they will say this stuff out loud just to kind of just to ease it a little bit, because then unfortunately a lot of the people we're goldfishes, and we are the useless eaters. We're not as smart as them, and that's not an insult. That's just a fact. So I think that they are now starting to kind of address it. For example, I remember a few months ago,
Yes.
James Cleverly, our home sec, he was like, yes, it was there was zero channel crossings today. And it's like, you looked outside in like January, December, and you go, it's called winter, James. Like that's not a political win. The reason why there is no channel crossings is because dinghies will sink. But I think one of the things they also try,
or swimmers will freeze, right?
Yeah, swimmers will get cold. They're not all as good as Dean Hall and Wim Hof, but and Thomas Seeger, another really interesting person to be talking to.
Or Callum Smiles. I see you in the ice bath, brother.
Yeah, I love it. It becomes an addiction. But they now try and kind of get around it in other ways by legalizing some form of like immigration, where they'll be saying like, well, we're going to do a refugee program from this country. They're bringing a load of Ukrainians.
Yeah. One of the things you said is that the government is almost placating us in a way to say, okay, we acknowledge the problem. Here are these little minuscule steps we're taking. And we're actually dealing with the exact same thing here, where now you're actually tempering what I've said, that they're acknowledging it. They are verbally acknowledging it, but are they acknowledging it in a policy sense? Well, the conversation here has been about this famous border bill that was introduced. And I've made a ton of videos about this, about how this border bill doesn't address the border crisis in the right way. I mean, what we went from is 2.4 million immigrants in 2022 that was in, I think, 2023, 2.4 million, half the citizenship of Ireland, right, coming through our southern border alone. And this proposed border bill that, quote unquote, solves the problem, well, it still allows 1.8 million illegal immigrants in illegally, meaning not we allow 1.8 in through points of entry, through this asylum seeking process. I say all the time, I'm a fan of immigration. Immigrants are very important. We're a nation of immigrants historically, right? But we need to set up the proper channels, the proper court systems to elect the right people to come in here and vet the criminals out, right? No one who's flushed their passport down the toilet is doing that for a moral or a just reason. They're doing that for nefarious reasons. So to see that the government is acknowledging it, but not taking any real meaningful steps is really quite sad. And the other thing you said that I really, really liked, and it reminded me of a situation we had here, is there should be some sort of consequence for blatantly lying, right? And or even simpler, for not keeping your campaign promises. If you're going to say that you're going to do something in office, then you damn well better do it. And that actually did happen in the United States. And it was very abrupt and jarring to a lot of people because, whoa, this hasn't really happened yet. When Speaker McCarthy came into power, there was this big deal. And it actually took, I think, 3 marathon days where Matt Gaetz, the Florida congressman, had said, I will not vote for him. I will hold out and prolong this vote for as long as it takes until he agrees to X, Y, and Z. And if he fails to do X, Y, and Z, right, which one of them was like release the January 6th surveillance footage, for example, if he fails to do it, we will oust him. And I get the right myself as Matt Gaetz, one person, to oust him if I say it. And Kevin McCarthy agreed to that. Kevin McCarthy failed at doing his promises. So Matt Gaetz fulfilled his promise and he ousted him from office. So it was a really cool way to say, hey, wait a minute, at some point, this bipartisan system, these checks and balances, they actually could work, right? But then it turns into partisan impeachments of Trump, of Biden. Frankly, I don't necessarily even agree to that at this time. So it's weird to see that in some cases, the government systems work as intended. And in some cases, it's just totally above the law in a lot of ways. So very, very interesting to compare. I mean, Callum, what else would you say? Like, what have we missed when it comes down to the WEF, your experiences in Ireland? Is there anything else that you think we need to talk about?
I mean, if you really want to, we could talk for days because there is so much. For anyone who's not quite aware as to who the WEF are, what they do, if you're fairly new to the game, as they say, you've got so much to catch up on. Like, get the biggest cup of tea you can, sit down and let's start talking. But off the top of my head, I mean, no, we've covered quite a lot. I mean, we spoke about how we disagree on voting, but I think what I would say.
Yeah, I think you should get out there and vote. You should have your voice heard. I say it this way. Let me cut you off. Ready? In our country, there's a lot of people that supported Ron DeSantis on the Republican side, and what I have seen lately is a lot of these people are frustrated that he pulled out of the race. And they're going to refuse to vote for Donald Trump in our general election in November. And they're proposing that they're going to write in Ron DeSantis, just on principle. And it's similar to what you're saying, right? If perhaps they decide not to vote as a protest or whatever it may be. But what I kind of tell these people, or how I equate it, is, you get a certain salary every year and you can negotiate that. Or, you get a certain number of meal tickets if you're impoverished, right? You get these certain handouts from the government, or these rights that are, some of them are inalienable or some of them are given. You're given one vote every 4 years. It's very finite. You don't get another one. So why would you electively throw that away? I don't think it's as meaningful or impactful as setting up a protest in front of an abortion clinic or camping out inside of a town hall to get a point across. At least then the governors or whomever are visually able to kind of observe that this is happening. If you go and do your protest and you choose not to vote, I don't know that people are going to really notice that. So it may only show that your candidate had less support in the end, and they may actually believe that. So, does that make sense? Does it resonate at all? Have I changed your mind? Have I convinced you otherwise?
It does. It does, but let me throw a counterpoint at you. And this is one of the reasons why, I see a lot of people saying, "Oh, we need a referendum on this. We need a referendum on that." For example, one of the things I saw there was a petition in to be discussed at the UK Parliament. It was we need to have a referendum on the WHO treaty. I was like, no. No, we don't. We should not vote on that, because if you take part in a vote on that, you are literally signing a contract saying, I agree to the outcome. So the reason why I'm not going to vote is because I don't agree to the outcome anymore. The way it is now, the way I wouldn't even say it's my opinion anymore. The way that what I know to be true is that I do not agree when it's the Labour wing of the WEF or the Conservative wing of the WEF. I don't agree to any of these politicians that don't have their own constituents' interests at heart. So I can't, in good faith, which is why I'm a firm believer of people not voting if they don't feel it's right to not vote, because I can't, in good faith, take part in what is on paper to be a democratic process when I don't agree to the outcome. And at least if, when shit hits the fan, I can go, I never agreed to any of this.
Yeah, I think it's fair. I mean, listen, I do understand in a way. And actually, I was listening to one of these business coaches. I think it was Alex Harmozy, who you probably don't even know, bearded rich guy that gives these tips and tricks on sales. But what he explained was that actually inaction is action. You are making a decision. You have your reasons to make that decision. And actually, at the end of the day, if many people did what you did, then maybe they would see the drastically lower turnout, and perhaps it would send a really strong message. So I think it's very respectable. I think what you're doing, however, is the most important form of protest. I love watching what you have. And again, I'm going to share it right here. So the link is going to be below to your full documentary, which you did a splendid job on. I think you really lifted the lid on some of what's going on over there. So Callum, tell me a little bit more about how can people find you? Where do you want them to follow you? And what's the next thing that you think you're going to be working on?
Well, I mean, there's always, you can see on the thing here, I put Callum Smiles Media. If you throw a .com on the end, you do go to the website. I am terrible for updating it though. I've literally just before this, I was like, oh, I should probably put the documentary on the website. I did that such a long time ago. But there is
Might be good.
yeah, there's my YouTube, there's my Rumble. It's annoying because I want people to go to Rumble instead of my YouTube, but Rumble's got 137 subscribers, and then the YouTube's at 1,500. And there's my Twitter, X, C_Smiles_news. Just over there. And the next thing, what's the next thing? I do want to go back to Ireland because I want to. There's a guy called Roderick O'Gorman. I'd like to ruin his career, and if his life was ruined at the same time, that wouldn't be the worst thing because the guy's pure evil. He's the minister he's a minister of, which is actually 3 jobs in one. So it's health, children, and integration. So the integration part is the immigration part, and So we're going to go off another segment. I know you're trying to end it now, but if you've got time, we can do another little segment here. Because there is this guy's
please. No, that's very interesting. Actually, he's in charge of those 3 items. They don't make any correlation to me.
But anyway, so there's an organisation called TUSLA, which is basically like the social services of Ireland, and a bit like in the UK, and I imagine in America, they subcontract other companies to perform services, which isn't a problem, and it's not out of the ordinary. But the regulations they're really lax. And there's a guy called Josie Akawobi, an African who's got multiple companies. He even owns some care homes in England. And through these different companies that he set up, he was taking on TUSLA contracts. And in February alone, 22 children went missing from TUSLA's care. Just gone. No one knows where they are. There was a raid on a brothel where a 14-year-old girl who was initially in TUSLA's care, who went missing, was found. And there's a retired judge that was emailing this Roderick O'Gorman information about TUSLA's failings, and he was deleting the emails. So I even tried to get in touch with this guy, and his office emailed back within an hour saying, I was like, look, I want to do an interview. It's not a gotcha moment. I'm not trying to, get you. I want to give you a fair opportunity to say your side and as to why you're doing what you're doing and to give you reasons. Because I think that's the only way we can really kind of, before violence, that's kind of the only way we can kind of sort some stuff out. Let's give even if I despise you, I want to be mature enough and adult enough to give you a fair opportunity to speak your mind and say why you do what you do. And within an hour, they're like, nah, we're not doing an interview.
Yeah.
I was like, right, well, that's your opportunity. So now I'm going to have to, I might have to play dirty. I might have to, maybe even do some things I'm not proud of. Because at the end of the day, this is children. Children are being harmed, possibly killed, most likely raped, because this man is failing them. And it's not failing through honest means. We all make mistakes. We all cock up. And a good man and woman goes, shit, I got it wrong, and either I resign and I apologize, or I'll try and physically make amends myself. This man is bad. He is not a good man, and unfortunately, like I said earlier, as to why I do what I do, is because I want to give I don't know if anyone else has said this. I'd love it if I coined the phrase, but I believe we now have an elitist class and the forgotten class, and I kind of want to help the forgotten class have their voice and also feel like they're safe again, because they're the furthest from being safe in my lifetime, and maybe even a long time before that. And this Roderick O'Gorman is still being paid by Irish tax euros, and he's still, I firmly believe, a danger to children.
And well, I think that you have some serious chutzpah. You have some real balls on you for going and doing some of the things that you do. Protect yourself, but continue to work hard, because what you're doing is important. It's the same goal as this podcast that Mike and I had started, right? Elevated Thoughts. Our goal is to restore discourse and give people the platform to talk about what they need to talk about and share their ideas, but also to avoid those gotcha moments and that arguing that we really see in the political sphere. We have all of this infighting, we have all of this unproductive conversation. And even if it is, in a way, going up and approaching somebody on the street to ask the question, at least the question's been asked. At least the question has been asked on a platform that can get some eyeballs, can get some attention. And actually, it was a beautiful moment in your documentary. You kind of scrolled through Google to look up what's going on in Ireland. And, well, Google isn't showing you. It's not at the top of the list, and it's barely even on page 2. So what you're doing is remarkably important. And actually, I'm really looking forward to what you can come up with next, because it does shine a light on some of these very important things, and always for a very noble cause, the protection of women and children. So no one can knock you for that. That is a great thing that you're doing. Callum, really, thank you for joining. And we're going to have you back when you work on your next project, because I really do look forward to it. And I look forward to what you always put out.
Cooper, I've always got all the time in the world for you. So, if you want, you can have me on whenever you want. Also, top tip: buy some silver. It's going through the roof right now. And I was talking to some people the other day who were really into it, and they were saying basically what drives it. And all this war in the Middle East is apparently going to drive up the price of silver. So it's a good way. It's a good way to hold value, because obviously the fiat currency in which we live in is nothing.
Yeah. Well, as I'll respond to you, this is what my ownership is in. I stake. I prefer the Bitcoin.
I don't trust Bitcoin because I don't know it. I don't like how you can't physically hold.
That's what they call it, a store of value.
But a guy put it to me in a really good way actually the other day. He said, if you take a Roman from 2,000 years ago, and obviously they have a lot of them had gold. If you brought him into the modern day, he'd be really rich because gold always holds value, whereas your pound is worth nothing compared to what it was 20 years ago. I was like, oh my God, yeah, that is so very true.
Yeah. No question.
So it's people have got to start looking at how they can look after themselves in many, many ways, and I think that's something to look into anyway. If people aren't gonna buy it, then that's fine. I'm not even getting money, by the way, by trying to sell it. It's just something I've been looking into. I was like, oh my God, more people.
Big Silver is paying you.
yeah, Big Silver. I wish.
I know. No, thank you again, Callum. Let's wrap this up. If people are gonna follow you, I'll link all your socials as well. Thank you. Seriously, man. You have a great day. All right.
And you. Cheers, mate. Thank you.